Jones. Thanks
Coach,
for joining us.
Always a pleasure.
It's so funny for me. You've had so many nicknames over the years. Like there's been Dean Machine, the Mean Dean, Dino, then Mr. Jones, which is supposed to obviously refer to keeping up with the Joneses, the proverbial Jones, right? And then someone started calling you Uncle Jones. I don't know where that started. So we're supposed to be Mr. Jones, and then it started Uncle Jones.
We know who to blame for that.
And I don't think you're too crazy about the Uncle Jones one. But the Mr. Jones and me, Dean Machine is my two favorite. So take me back. What was the first time that you can remember interacting with martial arts at all? As a child, as a teenager, way before the internet existed? Like, what was the first interaction that you can kind of vividly remember with martial arts?
It was sometime in, 15 years old, something. Standard 8 back in the day. I don't know what we would call it today. There were two of my friends who are actually responsible for this entire journey. And Sean Murphy and Gary Leach. And wherever they are in the world, I think shout out to them. Because at school, during break time, we used to play fight.
Okay.
And they used to always beat me up, basically. I could never get a handle on them. And both of them were, I think, karate guys at the time.
Okay.
And that's where it was like, nah, hell. These guys are always getting the better of me. They've got moves. Now I don't like this anymore. And that's where I went and found a karate school.
You started in karate at the end?
Yeah. And there was a place in Edenvale, and it was Goju-Ryu karate.
Okay.
And somehow I found that, and that's where we started. So that was the first exposure, I guess, and that was the start of it, yeah.
And then also, obviously, in the 70s and 80s, like kung fu movies were the rage, especially in the West, right? What was the first martial arts based like kung fu movie you ever watched?
Sure. That we have to go back a while. I think this will now give away a lot of time in that, but it was probably in the 70s.
Okay.
We were small little kiddies, and if I remember correctly, it was at my cousin's school, and my gran actually took us. There was a film being shown, and back in those days, you still had to hire the projector with the big reels and set it up. And that film I'll never forget was Bruce Lee's Way of the Dragon.
Way of the Dragon.
And that was the very first movie, actual, let's call it martial arts movie that we saw.
And were you transported, like teleported? Did you buy into it immediately?
Absolutely. His kind of energy, his way, just the whole vibe. You know, and as a little kiddie, when you watch this, you're like, whoa, this is next level. Yeah. How do we become this? Yeah. And especially the vibe of it. And, you know, he was in Hong Kong, and then he traveled, I think that one year. Then he ended up in Italy, and fought the bad guys, and he kicked them all. And
okay, well, just like Bruce Lee, you also eventually ended up moving to Hong Kong. Take us through that.
Sure, that was a very long story, but I carried on with martial arts training through high school, after school, and then going into university, and there were various styles and various aspects. And then I ended up at this one school where they were teaching it was Kung Fu basically. We were doing Hungar, the Tiger style, and we were also doing the Wing Chun, and we were also doing Wushu. And I tended to gravitate more to the Wing Chun. I just really enjoyed that. At the time, it wasn't really it was maybe a little bit of a watered down version, if I can say it that way. But then eventually that teacher, he was teaching, and we were working with him, and something got into our minds at the time, my girlfriend and I one night jokingly said, so wouldn't it be nice if we traveled to the Far East and found a teacher?
Yeah.
And her personality and the type of person she was, she said, okay, let's do it. I was joking. She became serious. And then the next thing we had resigned from our jobs, sold things, bought plane tickets. And through a very interesting series of coincidences, because we also then traveled to India and to Thailand, we all along the way, there were these little signs that were saying, go there.
Okay.
And we kind of followed them. And then there were little hints saying, go there and go there. And then eventually we ended up in Hong Kong. And even though at the time, strangely enough, we didn't really know, we were both studying Wing Chun. We didn't really know about who the teachers were and the hierarchy and where it came from. It just feels like this is a lacquer style to study. We really enjoy it. We know it's from southern China, but that was about it. And one of our training partners in South Africa, he said, listen, guys, if you're ever in Hong Kong, you have to go and train with Ip Chun. And my girlfriend and I, we both went, who's Ip Chun? And his eyes went wide with like, don't you know who Ip Chun is? And like, okay, mental note. But then through the travels, through England, through India, through Thailand, all of these little hints were directing us towards Hong Kong. And eventually, once we were in Thailand, we realized our money is running out. Part of the plan was to go somewhere and start working to earn money and then travel further. And coincidentally, my girlfriend had a British passport, which allowed her to work in Hong Kong.
Okay.
And we were there and we just thought, let's go. Everything's been hinting towards Hong Kong, and we booked tickets and we ended up there, and we'd also met somebody who knew somebody in Hong Kong and said, if you're ever here, phone this guy. They train in Kowloon Park on a Saturday. And we arrived on the Thursday night. We phoned this person and he said, sure, come meet us on Saturday in Kowloon Park. And so we went there on the Saturday morning and we met with the instructor and we chatted with him. And then just out of the blue, he said, what are you guys doing tonight? And we said, well, we've just arrived. We're like 4 days in Hong Kong. We're still getting our bearings and we don't know where we are. And he said, would you like to come through and meet Ip Chun and my teacher? And then something clicked in our minds. It's like, Ip Chun, we remember that name. And we said, why not? Yeah. And that night we got on the train. We went to Sha Tin, where his big school is. We went into the big training hall. There's lots of people training. And then they called Ip Chun over. He couldn't speak. He doesn't speak English. Yeah. So it was through a translator. And the guy who we had met in the park, he was a little bit of he wasn't socially the best.
Okay.
So he was just direct. And we chatted with him and we said, yeah, we'd love to learn with somebody and eventually open a school. That was our plan, eventually.
Yeah.
It's a nice idea.
In the distance.
It's a sweet idea, but and basically what he did is, there's the grandmaster who we'd now realized, oh, this is like
the guy.
One of the guys. Yeah, this is like one of the heads of the Wing Chun style. And we're now standing in front of him. We don't know what to say because it's all like, and this guy we met in the park, Paul, through the translator, said, oh, Sifu, this is Dean and Kathy, and they want to study with you and open a school in your name. And our eyes go wide, and when the words stick, and we go back. And Ip Chun then looked at us for about 30 seconds, and he thought, and then he turned to the translator and he said something, and the translator's eyes went wide. The translator turned to us and said, the Sifu says, you're starting next Friday. And Ip Chun turned around and walked away. And everybody's eyes went wide, and we're all going, and we're saying, well, what just happened? And Paul, the guy we'd met in the park, said, you're starting to train with Sifu on Friday. And that's how I ended up with Ip Chun, who is the son of Ip Man, the The grandmaster of Wing
So
Chun.
for many people that don't know, Ip Man is, he's regarded as like the grandmaster
Of the style,
and also Bruce Lee trained under Man, didn't he?
Bruce Lee was one of his students, I believe, in the 60s, and he trained with him. And then at a point, Bruce Lee went, I think there was some trouble in Hong Kong and he had to leave. Otherwise, there would be a lot of things coming down on his head. That's where he went to America and he started working in the movies. He became famous. And a lot of his stuff, obviously, that's his core development from his Jeet Kune Do is the Wing Chun principles.
Let's talk about Bruce Lee because like in certain MMA circles in today's time, some people are like divided on him. Some people say he was a true martial artist. And then on top of that, that led him to becoming a stuntman and then working in the movie. And then he became this icon. And other people say, no, he wasn't really a true martial artist. He was more of a showman than anything else. I read The Tao of Jeet Kune Do years ago.
Yes.
What struck me about it was, because for those who don't know, it's basically just a collection of all of his notes, his actual notes on the art, etc., etc. And he, even though MMA hadn't existed yet at that moment in time, this is way pre-UFC or anything that we know, he already spoke about this idea of absorbing what's useful,
discarding what isn't.
And then he actually crossed over into Western boxing. Even in the Tao of Jeet Kune Do, there's some very rudimentary like grappling that he shows, like neck holds, headlocks. So he was very much, in that sense, a true student of the game and a pioneer. And he was at that moment in time in the 70s, which is, again, pre-internet, pre-crossover. Because back then, martial arts also, you could never cross over unless you wanted to fight in the streets, right? It was karate versus taekwondo versus this versus that. But he broke tradition, but he experimented with a lot of things.
It was very controversial in the day because he was a true pioneer. One of the first, if not the first, call it mixed martial artist.
Yes.
Because back in the day, you got into a system, you had a teacher, and that was your family, and
it was very tribal.
Very tribal. And if you ever trained somewhere else, it was a big no-no. And it was just disrespectful. And that was what you didn't do. So Wing Chun was a distillation of all the best fighting techniques from the time, but done in a way that you could train somebody up so they could at least survive or have a fighting chance in 6 months, a year, 2 years, etc. So in essence, Wing Chun, if you actually look at the true history of it, not the myth surrounding it, the actual history, it came out of the guerrilla warfare at the time, out of the rebellion that they were trying to overthrow the dynasty, and they took what worked, they discarded what didn't, and this we can use immediately and effectively. And now Bruce Lee trained in Wing Chun. He never completed the system. And again, there's so many stories around there, but was there a fallout with Ip Man? Wasn't there a fallout with Ip Man? But Bruce Lee got to a point, he never quite completed. I think he only got to the second form. He never completed the third form, etc. But he took what he had learned, and I believe he took the principles. And part of that says, if it works, it's useful. If it doesn't work, then we have to either look at what are we doing wrong, what are we not understanding, and discard that. So at the time, it was highly controversial what he did. Today's world, it's almost a necessity because if you're fixed in a box and in a certain mindset, and the problem is, I think, with a lot of the traditional martial arts, as fantastic as they are, because they're passed down without questioning, we may lose the essence and we may lose practicality just because we don't question. And why do you do it this way? Because my teacher said so. Why does he do it this way? His teacher said so.
Interesting. Okay, so then after you were fighting on the rooftops in China and Hong Kong, like something out of a kung fu movie. You actually had that experience,
Yes.
practicing Wing Chun.
Yes.
At the source, eventually you guys moved back to South Africa and you started teaching Wing Chun.
We came back, we started a school, we started teaching Wing Chun. It's so funny today, I can now say that was last century. When we started teaching, and we did it for a couple of years, and very nice, and grew the art and trained up a lot of guys in it.
And how big is the Wing Chun community in South Africa now?
It's not as big as it was. I think it's always been a little bit of a niche, and it's been a little bit small. It's very interesting because how the martial arts moves in terms of growth and trends. Kung Fu in South Africa grew fairly well into the like the early 90s, into the late 90s, into the early 2000s. But then that also saw the rise of MMA. And I think Kung Fu kind of didn't become as prevalent as MMA. So there's still a fairly large Wing Chun community, but certainly not as big as it used to be. Yeah.
Fascinating. And then you are now a purple belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. But how did you find Jiu-Jitsu? How did that happen that you crossed over into the grappling arts from Wing Chun to there? Because you've told me there's similarities still in principles.
Completely, yes.
Universally, but Wing Chun is striking at close quarters.
Yes.
And there is clinching involved and a functional trapping, but then Jiu-Jitsu is on the ground and wrestling. How did you find Jiu-Jitsu? How did you start Jiu-Jitsu?
So, if we're going to be open, which we are always, the irony again is, even though I was in a system that was birthed out of questioning the prevalent martial mindset and finding practicality, interestingly enough, you train and you train, and then you adopt a mindset almost of, well, Wing Chun works, and that style's okay, but
we know better.
that style's good, but, and whether it was stubbornness or maybe a little bit of too much embedded pride in, we've been training this for so long, you tended to look at judo, jiu-jitsu, and especially as Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu became more and more popular as the years went, especially through MMA and all the fighting styles, etc., you tended to like hold yourself back from it. But at some point, and I don't know where it shifted, but at some point, I think you start to realize, hold on a second. If we're so limited, what are we missing out on? And eventually I found there was a resistance, but there was also a questioning, because end of the day, the way I also learned about Chinese martial arts, there's striking, there's kicking, there's grappling, and there's throws. And somewhere along the line, we learned that true Chinese Kung Fu has all of those elements. Some of them might be skewered on this side, or some of them might favor that side. But the philosophy is that a true martial art should have
all of those components.
Which,
in essence, is what MMA is. You go speak to any MMA coach, he's like, hey, you have your boxing, you have to have kickboxing and Muay Thai. And then on top of that, you have to wrestle and clinch. You have to be able to work on the ground. And that's basically the four fundamentals.
And then when I looked at Wing Chun, it's like, we've got striking, we've got kicking, we've got close quarter work, which we're really good at. If you understand the forms, you can absolutely see all the throws, the joint locks, the joint breaks. But where was the groundwork? And there was almost this resistance that came through from the traditional versus the newly emerging mixed martial arts, because mixed martial arts, let's just use the cliches, fights go to the ground. Traditional martial arts, that will never happen to us because we can do this and this technique, and we will do that until you meet a really competent wrestler or a competent jiu-jitsu practitioner who suddenly gets in and you find yourself swept or taken down. So that opened up the mind, I think. And then I started just looking into it. And eventually I found a school because they were also talking about the flow and the way of training. And
that was the first gym with Rodney King.
That's correct, yeah. And because there was a class on a Saturday, which didn't interfere with anything else, it was like, you know what, I like this idea about flow, because that's also something that's been, I've explored that, I've trained into it through various other systems. And for me, that is the key to longevity in the martial arts. And I went along and tried a class, and it was so great. And it was like, interestingly enough, whenever we were doing, right, guys, let's do this position, let's go into this movement, I'm starting to see, oh, but this is, in Wing Chun, we call it a Tan Sao. Or if you ever get into this position, you can try get out by doing this or this and that. Oh, but that's a Bong Sao. That's just the terminology we use.
But it's the same fundamental thing.
Same fundamental thing, because an arm is an arm and it moves in certain ways. There's vectors, there's geometry. End of the day, it's all movement. And I think that was also part of my slight advantage, is because I could see movements because of, I'm so used to these angles and these structures. That's all really Wing Chun is. It teaches you structures. And there's the ideal structure that you have, but the application of it is something different, because every opponent is different. Shorter, bigger, smaller, etc.
So let's touch on that point quickly, because you said that in the past where you feel that Wing Chun and most of the Chinese martial arts and traditional martial arts, they have some merit. And if you go back in history, there was always a focus on live training with resistance.
Yes.
And then over the years, form started taking precedence.
Yes.
There was less of an emphasis on resistance and live training. And that happens in everything. Sometimes that even happens in boxing, where some people do everything but live boxing. So they're hitting bags and mitts, and those are tools. But you could compare that directly with forms and katas and martial arts, like certain shadow boxing routines that people do for boxing and kickboxing. It's the same as doing a kata, but that live training is important. Now, we know that, look, if you do too much live training, or you do it very unstructured, or you just kind of let everybody go crazy, injuries will happen, people will quit. But how important is the live training, the sparring aspect, the going up against different body types, different resistance? How important do you think that is from a Wing Chun perspective, but also from martial arts universally?
Okay, the short answer, it's crucial. It's, without it, you never get to learn and to grow fully.
You're never challenged.
You're never challenged. You will remain stuck in your preconceived notions and in your box. Now, the long answer. Or the medium answer. Back in the day, in the 50s and the 60s, when Ip Man started teaching, and Hong Kong was growing, and you had all the different styles, Hunga, Choila Foot, Mantis, May, etc. They were all there, and they were all, in a sense, rivals. So because of the rivalry, and because you were part of a clan, and, for example, the Wing Chun clan traditionally always had the Choila Foot clan as their main rivals. You would go and test your art on the rooftops. And these were full contact fights, basically. And you went and you had your encounter with another style. And then you go back and you'd say, Sifu, he did this and I tried to use this technique and it didn't work. And then you troubleshoot and you'd test things and you'd learn from that. That faded out, I think, probably sometimes into the 70s. Definitely in the 80s and the 90s, there was none of that anymore. And then Wing Chun itself became very much just we do our training within our parameter with another Wing Chun practitioner.
You never go up against a boxer or a kickboxer.
Yeah.
Or
So one day when somebody throws a round hook, what do you do? How do you handle that? Because you were always training with the Wing Chun style of punching. And that I think diluted the system down terribly. They lost their fighting edge. They lost their essence. They also lost their ability to curiously explore different ways. Because end of the day, the principles tell us a punch is a punch.
Yeah.
But how many ways can you punch? And which one of them is correct? Well, the punch in that particular moment that lands is the right one. Yeah. Exactly. Yes. And if it doesn't look like your traditional punch, so what?
So what? Yeah.
And I think that is the essence. So through training in Wing Chun, I did, especially when we were in Hong Kong, I did notice that it was live, it was against a resisting opponent, but it was still too contained. So that live training, I think, is essential because it forces you to understand different aspects and different parameters.